Have you ever wondered what could go wrong during the happiest time of the year? For most, Christmas is a time for family, joy, and festive lights. But what if behind the bright facade lies a shadow waiting to strike? In the season of giving, not every gift is welcome. This is the story of a single mother and her son, who unknowingly invited terror into their lives during a simple shopping trip. Let me take you on a journey where a cheerful mall Santa turns into a nightmare. It was a chilly December afternoon, and the streets were alive with the hum of holiday shoppers. Sarah, a 27-year-old single mother, walked hand in hand with her 5-year-old son, Mark. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts and peppermint, and the festive decorations glimmered under the evening lights. Sarah was exhausted but content, her arms full of shopping bags after an afternoon spent picking gifts for her family. Their last stop was McDonald's, where Sarah treated Mark to his favorite combo, burgers and ice cream. As they left the south exit of the mall, Mark tugged at her sleeve. "Look, Mom, it's Santa," he exclaimed, pointing to a man in a red suit waving near the exit. The mall Santa seemed cheerful enough, his rosy cheeks and white beard fitting the part perfectly. Sarah smiled and allowed Mark to approach him. The man knelt down to Mark's level and asked in a jovial voice, "What do you want for Christmas, young man?" Mark eagerly replied, "A Nintendo Switch." The Santa laughed heartily and glanced at Sarah, adding with a wink, "If you're good, maybe Santa will deliver." At first, everything felt innocent. But then, his tone shifted. "You've got a beautiful mom there, Mark," he said, his eyes lingering on Sarah. She laughed nervously, brushing it off. As they turned to leave, the Santa's gaze followed them, his smile lingering just a little too long. That night, Sarah couldn't shake the unease she felt from their interaction. Yet, she told herself it was nothing more than an awkward moment. Hours later, Sarah and Mark were curled up on the couch watching A Christmas Carol. The warmth of their living room provided a stark contrast to the cold winds outside. As Mark dozed off, Sarah glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. She gently carried Mark to his bed and returned to the living room to tidy up. The sound of the doorbell shattered the peaceful silence. Her heart skipped a beat. Who could be at the door so late? Cautiously, Sarah approached the door and called out, "Who is it?" A deep voice answered from the other side, "It's Santa." Her stomach dropped. "Please leave, or I'll call the police," she said, trying to mask the fear in her voice. "You dropped something from your bag," the man replied. "I'm just returning it." Sarah hesitated, her hand hovering near the doorknob. "What did I drop?" "I don't know, miss. I'm just trying to help," the voice said. Her instincts screamed that something was wrong. She backed away from the door and grabbed her phone to call mall management. When she explained the situation, the man on the other end of the line revealed something chilling. "We don't officially hire mall Santas. Anyone dressed as Santa is doing so independently." Her heart raced. Who was the man she and Mark had spoken to earlier? Sarah peered out the window, but the street was empty. Then, from the darkness outside, she heard it, a chilling voice yelling, "Ho, ho, ho." It was distant, but unmistakable. The laughter echoed in her ears, sinister and mocking. She called the police and locked every door and window. When the officers arrived, they reassured her, but Sarah's mind was far from at ease. Somewhere out there, the man in the Santa suit was watching. The days following the encounter were uneventful, but Sarah remained on edge. Every creak in the house made her jump, and she found herself glancing over her shoulder more often than usual. Mark, blissfully unaware of her anxiety, continued to talk excitedly about Christmas and the Nintendo Switch he was sure Santa would bring. 3 nights after the initial incident, the doorbell rang again. Sarah froze mid-step, her heart pounding in her chest. It was late, almost 11 p.m., and Mark was already asleep. She turned off the TV, plunging the living room into silence. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. No response. She crept to the door and peered through the peephole. The porch was empty, but something white fluttered in the faint light. She hesitated before unlocking the door and opening it just wide enough to see a folded piece of paper taped to the door. Her hands shook as she retrieved the note. Back inside, she unfolded it and gasped. The message was typed and disturbingly personal. "I'll just be blunt. I'm sure you can guess who this is. I didn't mean to scare you the other night. I just had a long shift, and when a pretty lady talks to you after pretending to be Santa for hours, hormones kind of go crazy. You and your son are the cutest things ever, and I'd love to one day be a part of your family." You can't pretend you didn't feel the connection when we spoke the other night. I already know where you live. Now I just need your number. Feel free to shoot me a text whenever, and maybe we can plan something one day. Sorry if this seems creepy, but I'm the kind of guy who goes after what I like. Anyway, happy holidays if we don't speak soon. Here's my number. Best, Ted. A wave of nausea hit Sarah as she realized the man knew where she lived. She snapped a photo of the letter and immediately called the police. The police arrived within the hour. Sarah handed over the letter and explained everything that had happened, from the encounter at the mall to the late-night doorbell and now this message. The officer read the note with a furrowed brow and assured Sarah they would investigate. Using the phone number provided in the letter, the police tracked down Ted, who turned out to be a man in his late 30s with no known criminal record. He was questioned and warned to stay away from Sarah and Mark. While the authorities assured her he posed no immediate danger, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. She began double-checking locks, installing security cameras, and even sleeping with a kitchen knife on her bedside table. Mark, ever the curious child, noticed the change in his mother. "Why are you scared, Mommy?" he asked one evening, his innocent eyes filled with concern. Sarah didn't have the heart to explain fully, so she just smiled and said, "Mommy's making sure Santa doesn't get lost." The days dragged on, and Christmas finally arrived. Sarah did her best to make the day special for Mark. He squealed with joy when he unwrapped the Nintendo Switch he had bought weeks ago. For a brief moment, the warmth of the holiday filled the house, pushing away the shadow that had loomed over them. A week later, Sarah received a call from the police. The man had been formally warned, and they assured her he wouldn't contact her again. If he did, he would face serious legal consequences. Though the incident seemed to be resolved, the sense of safety Sarah once felt in her own home was gone. Every time she saw Santa in a mall or on TV, she felt a pang of unease. What should have been a joyful symbol of the season had become a haunting reminder of how quickly joy could turn into fear. Just as Sarah thought her nightmare was over, another family across town was about to face their own terrifying Christmas Eve. The snow fell softly outside the suburban home as 6-year-old Danny lay wide awake in his bed. The anticipation of Christmas morning filled him with excitement too overwhelming to sleep. The glow of his small box TV illuminated his room as he played a Star Wars game on his old PlayStation. He turned the volume down low to avoid waking his parents, knowing he wasn't supposed to be up this late. When nature called, Danny tiptoed to the upstairs bathroom, careful not to make any noise. On his way back to bed, he paused at the top of the stairs. Something wasn't right. He heard faint rustling sounds coming from the living room below. His little heart raced with excitement. Could it be Santa? Unable to resist, Danny tiptoed down the stairs, his small hands gripping the railing. As he reached the bottom, he peeked around the wall into the living room. The only source of light came from the colorful Christmas tree, its ornaments reflecting in the dim glow. But then he saw it, a shadowy figure crouched behind the tree. The person was rummaging through the gifts, placing them into a large black bag. Danny's breath caught in his throat. The figure turned slightly, and the beam of a flashlight briefly illuminated a face he didn't recognize. "Santa?" Danny whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and fear. The man froze, turning toward Danny. He raised a finger to his lips, motioning for silence. "Sure, yes, I'm Santa," the man whispered back. Something about the man's appearance didn't match the jolly image Danny had seen in books and movies. His face was gaunt, his clothes disheveled. Danny's instincts kicked in. This wasn't Santa. "Santa!" Danny screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice echoing through the house. The man panicked, scrambling to grab the bag of stolen gifts. Danny's cries brought his parents rushing down the stairs. His father, still half asleep, stumbled into the living room and froze at the sight of the intruder. "Get out of my house!" his father roared, stepping between the man and his family. The thief hesitated, looking between the door and the black bag filled with stolen presents. Finally, he dropped the bag and bolted toward the front door, slamming it shut behind him as he fled into the snowy night. Danny's mother scooped him up, holding him tightly as he sobbed into her shoulder. His father, shaking with adrenaline, locked the door and called the police. Minutes later, 2 officers arrived, surveying the damage. The tree was disheveled, several ornaments were missing, and the back door had been forced open with what appeared to be a crowbar. "He was taking our presents," Danny's father explained to the officers, his voice tight with anger. The officers took their report and promised to patrol the neighborhood in case the man returned. As they left, one of them turned and said, "You're lucky your son was brave enough to sound the alarm. This guy has hit a few houses in the area already." Danny's father nodded, his expression grim. As the family sat together in the living room, their presents still scattered but safe, Danny's mother kissed his forehead and whispered, "You're our hero tonight, sweetie." Danny smiled faintly, still clutching the stuffed reindeer he had grabbed from under the tree in the chaos. Despite the terror of the night, the family found solace in each other, knowing that their bond was stronger than anything a thief could take. The nightmare seemed to be over, but Danny's family would soon learn they weren't the only victims of this shadowy Christmas thief. The following morning, Danny's parents tried to downplay the previous night's events, hoping to shield him from the lingering fear. They tidied up the living room, setting the Christmas tree back in order and carefully rewrapping the torn presents. However, as the day wore on, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. Over breakfast, Danny's father read the local news on his phone. One headline stood out: "Neighborhood hit by Christmas thief. Multiple homes targeted overnight." "Look at this," he said, sliding the phone across the table to Danny's mother. The article detailed a string of break-ins in the area, all with the same MO. Forced entry through the back door, gifts stolen, and occasionally, sentimental ornaments taken from the Christmas tree. Danny overheard and interrupted. "He took our ornaments too." His parents exchanged worried glances. Danny's father called the police to report the similarities between their experience and the other incidents in the neighborhood. An officer arrived later that afternoon to take an updated statement and share more details about the ongoing investigation. "Based on the descriptions we've received, we believe the thief is working alone," the officer explained. "He's targeting homes with visible Christmas decorations. It's a reminder for everyone to stay vigilant." The officer's words brought little comfort to Danny's family. That night, they double-checked every lock and even left the lights on in the living room. Danny's father stayed up late, his ears attuned to every sound, ready to confront the thief if he dared to return. 2 nights later, just as the family was beginning to relax, Danny's father was jolted awake by a muffled noise from downstairs. His heart raced as he grabbed a flashlight and quietly woke Danny's mother. "Stay here with Danny," he whispered. Slowly descending the stairs, he held the flashlight tightly, shining it toward the living room. A shadow darted across the room, and his worst fear was confirmed. The thief had returned. "Hey, stop right there," he bellowed, charging toward the figure. The man froze for a moment before sprinting toward the back door, which he had already pried open. But this time, Danny's father was faster. He tackled the thief just as he reached the door, pinning him to the ground. The commotion woke Danny and his mother, who quickly called the police. Danny stood at the top of the stairs, watching in awe as his father restrained the intruder. Minutes later, flashing red and blue lights filled the street. The police stormed into the house, handcuffing the man and leading him outside. He was a disheveled, middle-aged man, clearly desperate. "Why would you do this?" Danny's father demanded as the thief was led away. The man muttered something unintelligible before disappearing into the back seat of the patrol car. The officers later revealed that the thief had been living in an abandoned house a few streets over. Inside, they found stolen items from multiple homes, including Christmas ornaments and gifts. Many of the items were returned to their rightful owners, though some sentimental pieces were never recovered. For Danny's family, the ordeal was finally over. While the scars of the experience lingered, the sense of community that emerged from the neighbors coming together to share their stories brought a sense of comfort. As Danny's family regained their sense of safety, another community was about to uncover something far darker, hidden in plain sight. December 2020 was a festive season for most families in the quiet suburban neighborhood where Sarah and her fiancé Tom had recently settled. Their modest house, adorned with twinkling lights and a cheerful wreath, fit perfectly among the similarly decorated homes lining their street. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other by name, or at least thought they did. Paul, the man who lived next door, was the kind of neighbor who kept to himself. A single man in his early 40s, Paul was polite but distant, exchanging little more than a wave or nod when passing by. He kept his house well maintained and even put up Christmas lights each year, which Tom had once jokingly called impressive for a bachelor. However, something about Paul's house felt off this December. Tom had noticed his car hadn't moved from the driveway in days, and the blinds on all his windows remained perpetually closed. At first, Tom thought Paul might have gone out of town, but the lights on his porch and Christmas tree suggested otherwise. One evening, while hanging their own Christmas decorations, Tom and Sarah noticed something peculiar. Paul's Christmas lights, which were usually steady and uniform, began flickering erratically. The sudden strobe-like effect drew Tom's attention. "Looks like his lights are shorting out," Tom said, half to himself. Sarah glanced over. "Maybe we should tell him. What if it's dangerous?" Tom shrugged. "I'll mention it if I see him." The flickering lights stopped as suddenly as they had started, leaving Tom uneasy. The next morning, he left for work, pausing to glance at Paul's house. His car was still there, and the blinds remained shut. That evening, while walking back from the mailbox, Tom noticed the flickering lights again. This time, curiosity got the better of him. He decided to knock on Paul's door. The first knock went unanswered, so Tom knocked again, louder. Finally, the door opened and Paul stood there, his face pale and tired-looking. "Hey, Paul," Tom began. "I noticed your lights have been flickering. Thought you should know." Paul looked over Tom's shoulder briefly before muttering, "Thanks. I'll check it out." Before Tom could say anything else, a faint noise from inside the house caught his attention. It was high-pitched and faint, like a muffled cry. "Did you hear that?" Tom asked, his brow furrowing. Paul's face darkened. "It's probably just my TV." Without waiting for a response, he shut the door. Tom walked back to his house, unease gnawing at him. Paul was acting weird, he said as he stepped into the living room, where Sarah was watching TV. "Weird how?" Sarah asked. Tom explained the interaction, including the sound he thought he had heard. Sarah frowned. "You don't think? I mean, it couldn't be anything serious, right?" Tom hesitated. "I don't know. It just felt wrong. And that noise didn't sound like a TV." The couple decided to let it go for the night, but Tom's mind wouldn't rest. The next morning, he woke early and stood at the window, watching Paul's house. There was no sign of movement. Later that day, while taking out the trash, Tom walked closer to Paul's side of the house. He noticed something odd. The basement window was covered from the inside, but there were faint shadows moving behind it. His stomach turned. Could Paul be hiding something? That evening, the flickering lights returned. This time, Sarah saw them too. "Maybe it's a cry for help," she joked nervously, trying to lighten the mood. But Tom didn't laugh. "I think we should call the police," he said finally. "For what? Flickering lights?" Sarah asked, incredulous. Tom explained his growing suspicions. The closed blinds, the muffled noise, the shadows in the basement. "Something's not right," he insisted. Reluctantly, Sarah agreed. They called the police, asking to remain anonymous. When officers arrived at Paul's house, Tom and Sarah watched nervously from their window. They saw Paul open the door, looking calm as he spoke with the police. Moments later, the officers entered the house. What happened next shocked them both. What the officers found inside Paul's house would forever change the way the neighborhood saw him and themselves. Tom and Sarah watched anxiously as the police entered Paul's house, their stomachs churning with a mix of fear and curiosity. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours, until the officers emerged again. This time, they were not alone. A young boy, no older than 10, was led out of the house, his face pale and tear-streaked. His small hands clutched a blanket one of the officers had given him. Sarah gasped audibly, and Tom instinctively grabbed her hand. The scene was surreal. Paul was placed in handcuffs and escorted to a patrol car while the boy was gently guided into another vehicle. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the snow, casting an eerie glow over the quiet street. Tom couldn't hold back anymore. He stepped outside, walking toward the officer who seemed to be in charge. "Excuse me, officer," he called out hesitantly. The man turned, his expression serious but not unkind. "Can I help you?" Tom took a deep breath. "I'm the one who called. What's going on?" The officer hesitated before replying. The boy was reported missing from a neighboring town several days ago. He was found locked in the basement. Sarah, who had joined Tom outside, covered her mouth in shock. "Locked in the basement," she whispered. The officer nodded grimly. He was malnourished and scared, but otherwise unharmed. It seems he managed to find a way to flicker the Christmas lights to signal for help. Tom's mind reeled. The flickering lights hadn't been a coincidence. They had been a desperate plea for salvation. "Will the boy be okay?" Sarah asked softly. "He's being reunited with his family," the officer said. "And as for Paul, he won't see the light of day for a very long time." The news of Paul's arrest spread quickly through the neighborhood. For days, the street buzzed with whispers and theories about how a man who seemed so ordinary could be capable of something so monstrous. Tom and Sarah couldn't stop replaying the events in their minds. The sound Tom had heard, the shadows in the basement window, the flickering lights, it all added up now. They learned from the news that the boy had been abducted while walking home from school. Paul, who had no criminal record, had kept him hidden for 4 days. The thought of what could have happened if they hadn't called the police was unbearable. One evening, as Tom stood by the window, looking out at the now darkened house next door, Sarah joined him. "Do you think anyone really knows their neighbors?" she asked quietly. Tom shook his head. "Not really. You never know what someone's hiding." Christmas morning came with a bittersweet atmosphere. Tom and Sarah tried to focus on the joy of the season, exchanging gifts and calling loved ones. But the shadow of what had happened lingered. When Tom stepped outside to retrieve the newspaper, he noticed something on their porch. A single candy cane tied with a red ribbon. Attached was a note, written in a child's messy handwriting. "Thank you for saving me. Merry Christmas." Tom stood there for a long moment, the note trembling in his hands. While Tom and Sarah found solace in their role as unexpected heroes, another young couple would soon discover that sometimes the real danger lies closer than you think, right beneath your feet. The living room was aglow with the soft, warm lights of a decorated Christmas tree. Anna and her boyfriend, James, were curled up on the couch with glasses of wine, watching the Polar Express for the umpteenth time. Outside, a light snow dusted the neighborhood, adding to the holiday charm. "Nothing beats this," Anna said, resting her head on James's shoulder. "Except maybe more wine," James joked, holding up his empty glass. "I'll grab another bottle," Anna said. Standing up and stretching, she disappeared into the kitchen while James paused the movie and checked his phone. Minutes later, Anna returned, clutching the wine bottle. "We're down to the last one," she said, placing it on the coffee table. James frowned. "I'll run to the liquor store real quick. Be back in 10. Anna waved him off with a smile, settling back on the couch. Alone in the house, she reached for her phone and scrolled aimlessly through social media, letting the quietness of the moment wrap around her. But then, a faint noise caught her attention. It was subtle at first, a barely audible thump from below. She froze, her eyes darting toward the floor. The sound came again, louder this time. It seemed to echo up from the crawl space beneath the house. Anna shook her head, telling herself it was nothing. Probably just the house settling, she thought. Or maybe an animal that had somehow gotten in. She grabbed her phone and called James, keeping her voice calm. "Hey, can you stay on the phone with me? I think I hear something downstairs." James chuckled. "It's probably a raccoon or something. I'll check it out when I get back." Anna agreed, but her grip on the phone tightened as the noises continued. By the time James returned, Anna's nerves were frayed. She hadn't heard the noises again, but the memory of them lingered. It was probably nothing, Anna admitted as James walked in, setting a fresh bottle of wine on the counter. "Well, let's take a look just in case," James said, grabbing a flashlight from the closet. Reluctantly, Anna followed him to the small door that led to the crawl space. James opened it, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the dark, cramped area. The faint smell of damp earth and something else, something sharp, almost metallic, wafted up. "Stay here," James said, flipping on the flashlight and descending the stairs. Anna waited at the top, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "See anything?" she called out. "Just a lot of junk," James replied, his voice muffled. "Boxes, old furniture, some cobwebs." He trailed off, and Anna leaned closer to the opening. "What?" she asked nervously. "There's a puddle down here." "Smells awful," James said. Anna's stomach churned. "What kind of puddle?" "I don't know. Might be animal urine or something," James said, stepping closer to inspect it. He shined the flashlight around the area, but saw no signs of movement. Still, the smell was overwhelming. "Let's just close this up for now," James said, climbing back up. "We'll call someone to check it out tomorrow." Anna agreed, but neither of them could shake the feeling that something was off. Later that night, as they settled into bed, Anna lay awake, her ears straining for any sound. Hours passed without incident, and she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. But just before dawn, James jolted awake. A noise, faint but distinct, came from the hallway outside their bedroom. It wasn't the subtle thump they'd heard earlier. This was heavier, deliberate, like slow footsteps. "Did you hear that?" James whispered, nudging Anna awake. She sat up, her heart pounding. "What is it?" "I don't know," James said, grabbing his phone and turning on the flashlight. He opened the bedroom door cautiously, the beam of light slicing through the darkness of the hallway. At the far end, a figure stood motionless, its silhouette barely visible in the dim light. What James and Anna would discover next would turn their cozy Christmas night into a nightmare they'd never forget. James froze, the flashlight shaking slightly in his hand as he stared at the figure at the end of the hallway. Anna clutched his arm, her breath caught in her throat. "Who's there?" James demanded, his voice trembling but firm. The figure didn't move. For a moment, the hallway was deathly silent, except for the faint creak of the floor under James's shifting weight. "James," Anna whispered, her grip tightening. The figure suddenly turned and bolted toward the crawlspace door. James lunged forward instinctively, but the intruder moved too quickly, disappearing through the narrow opening. "Call the police," James shouted to Anna as he ran after the figure, stopping just short of the crawlspace door. The smell of urine and dampness hit him again, but this time it was almost unbearable. Anna fumbled with her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed 911. "There's someone in our house," she stammered, giving the operator their address. James crouched by the crawlspace door, shining his flashlight into the dark abyss below. He couldn't see anything but the same cluttered boxes and shadows from before. Minutes later, the sound of approaching sirens broke the tense silence. James backed away from the crawl space as two police officers arrived, their flashlights and weapons drawn. The officers descended into the crawl space, their voices echoing faintly as they searched. After several tense moments, they re-emerged. "He's gone," one of the officers said. "Looks like he might have been living down there for a while. There's a makeshift bed and some empty food containers." Anna gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Living down there? How long?" The officer shrugged. "Could be days, could be weeks. We'll send a team to investigate further." The police stayed for hours, combing through the crawl space and documenting evidence. They found a tattered sleeping bag, a few cans of food, and a notebook filled with incoherent scribbles. The most chilling discovery, however, was a pile of trash that included items clearly taken from Anna and James's home. An old sweater Anna thought she'd misplaced, a photo frame from their living room, and even a half-eaten candy cane from the Christmas tree. Anna shivered as she realized how close the intruder had been to them all along. "He must have come out when we weren't home," she whispered. The officers assured them that the house was secure and that they would increase patrols in the area. But no amount of reassurance could erase the unsettling knowledge that someone had been living beneath their feet. That night, Anna and James slept with the lights on, their bedroom door barricaded with furniture. Every creak of the house made their hearts race. The next morning, a pest control team arrived to inspect the crawl space and seal any potential entry points. The workers confirmed what the police had suspected. The intruder had likely entered through a vent in the foundation. James and Anna decided to spend the holidays at Anna's parents' house, unable to shake the feeling of violation. Before leaving, Anna stood in the living room, staring at the tree. The festive lights and ornaments felt hollow now, their joy overshadowed by the terror of the past 2 days. "Do you think we'll ever feel safe here again?" Anna asked softly. James wrapped his arm around her. "We will," he said, though his voice carried a trace of doubt. "It'll just take time." As they drove away, the house stood silent and dark, the shadow of what had happened lingering like an unwelcome guest. The holidays are a time of joy and connection, but they can also reveal the shadows lurking in the most unexpected places. For Sarah, Tom, Danny, and Anna, Christmas would forever carry the weight of their harrowing experiences. Sarah and her son found solace in the support of friends and the knowledge that her stalker had been dealt with. Tom and Sarah became heroes in their neighborhood, though they would never forget the chilling reality of the boy trapped next door. Danny's bravery saved his family's Christmas, and his parents learned the importance of vigilance in even the safest of neighborhoods. As for Anna and James, they eventually returned to their home, but the memory of the intruder lingered in their minds. They took every precaution to secure their house, but the faintest creak or shadow would always remind them of that dark Christmas night. Each of them discovered that even in the brightest season, darkness can creep in. But their stories also revealed the resilience of the human spirit and the strength found in unity, courage, and love. Christmas, after all, is a season of light. And even in the darkest moments, that light can shine through.